welcome back to DIY with Dave. I made a video a few months back where I talked about the price of lumber, and I've really learned a lot from the comments that you guys have listed about the industry, about prices where you are and what you're seeing. So keep those comments coming because I think they're really interesting. But there were a few comments that I got that kind of puzzled me, that didn't seem to make sense, like this one. At first, I couldn't really make sense of what people were saying. You would think that if prices were high, that everyone in the supply chain would be benefiting in some degree, but that's not what's happening. And in this video, I'm going to tell you what is happening, and we're going to get to the bottom of who is getting rich off of high lumber prices. So it takes a lot to get lumber from a tree in the forest to a board in your local big box store. Trees first need to be cut, sawn, dried, packaged, shipped, and then picked up or delivered. In that whole supply chain, you have landowners, you have loggers, truckers, sawmill operators, retailers, and others. Now, with wood prices so high, again, you would think that everyone's benefiting, but they're not. So the big question is, what is happening? So let's start with the little guy. You've got loggers, you've got truck drivers, you have sawmill workers. Most of these people are paid hourly, and while there may be more overtime available right now, none of these people are getting rich off of high lumber prices. Now, there is a lot of demand for trucking right now, and so trucking companies may be making more money, and that may be passing on, but it's nowhere near enough to account for the huge spike and increase in lumber prices that we've seen recently. So what about retailers like Home Depot or Lowe's? Well, retailers make their money off of margin, and what that means is that they buy a product at a certain price, they mark it up, say 5%, and then sell it to consumers. They have expenses along the way. They've got employees they need to pay, they have transportation costs, they have store costs, and that all comes out of that margin plus a little bit of profit. So if the price increases, they may make slightly more, but it's, again, nowhere near enough to account for the huge increase in lumber prices that we've seen. So while those retailers, the Lowe's and Home Depots of the world, may be the face of high lumber prices, they're not the ones that are making money hand over fist. So what about landowners? I'm talking about timber landowners, the people who own the land where the trees and the logs come from. You would think that if lumber prices were so high, there would be a huge demand for logs and those people would be making a killing, right? No, they're not. They're not making a lot of money. And the reason for that is really pretty interesting. So stick with me here while I explain what's going on. So to understand what's going on here, we need to go all the way back to the 1980s. And in the early 1980s, there was a farm crisis. And this farm crisis really drove a lot of farmers out of business. Farms were being foreclosed on, rural communities were being destroyed, and it was a huge problem for the country as a whole. So the farm crisis was terrible for a lot of reasons. One of the biggest things was that it depressed rural economies. You had farmers who were being foreclosed on, business in farming areas that was just being lost. Family farms that had been in families for generations were being lost. And it also impacted prices, commodity prices and food prices. And it was a real big problem that had a rippling effect throughout the economy. And so this prompted President Reagan to sign the Farm Bill in 1985.
Thank you all for the Herculean effort you put forth on behalf of America's farmers. This legislation will help put America's farmers back into a competitive position in world markets. America's farmers are the most productive in the world. This bill will help unleash their enormous productive capacity and will help America reclaim lost markets.
Now, there was a lot in this farm bill, but one of the provisions was called the Conservation Reserve Program, or the CRP. Now, the CRP was essentially a subsidy program. Now, it was designed to take some farmland out of commission, and that would help stabilize some prices. The idea was that farmers were going to get paid to convert their farmland from farmland into forest land or timberland. Now, it was originally meant to be a short-term program that would convert farmland into timberland, thus, helping stabilize farm prices, also helping, the environment. All that land, for the most part, when the European settlers first came, was timberland that had been cut and used for, ships and homes and things like that. And so it was really kind of getting back to nature. It was going to have environmental benefits. It was going to have benefits for the economy as a whole. So while it may have been a great program at first and accomplished a lot of the goals that it set out to accomplish, it went on for far too long. So under that program, over 22.6 million acres have been converted from farmland into timberland. And over $50 billion have been paid out to landowners since 1986. So now fast forward to today, there are millions more acres of timberland today than there was 20, 30 years ago. Now, it sounds like that would be a good thing for lumber prices, right? It seems like there would be tons of supply of timber, of raw materials to increase the lumber supply and reduce prices, right? But that's wrong. In fact, raw timber prices in the southeast of the US are the lowest they have been in decades. So as an example to illustrate what I'm talking about, I have put together this graph of stumpage prices, of raw timber prices from North Carolina. While there was a kind of a big spike in stumpage prices and raw timber prices in the early 2000s. Since then, it's really been down. And in looking at this graph, you can see that the prices today are about the same as they were in the late 1990s. Now, that is in real dollar terms, but a dollar isn't worth today what it was in the 1990s. And so if you adjust for inflation, which I've done in this graph right here, it's even worse. And the prices today are the lowest they have ever been. Now, those graphs are for North Carolina, but what we see in those graphs there for North Carolina is happening all across the South. So you may ask, what about that government program that's been paying billions of dollars to landowners for decades, right? Well, to take advantage of that program, you had to convert farmland into timberland. So if you already had timberland, you're not getting any of that benefit. Also, what tends to happen with a lot of these government programs as they continue over time, the people that take advantage of them are the ones who are sophisticated enough to know how to take advantage of them. And they tend to be the people that don't need them. In fact, the guy who was responsible for getting the CRP put into the Farm Bill said this about it. Like everything else in government that starts out with honorable intent, the CRP gained entrenched political support, then turned into a crony capitalist welfare system for well-heeled farmers. Okay, so again, you've got just tons and tons of raw timber, right? Tons and tons of raw materials that can be used to make boards or lumber goods, sheet goods, that sort of thing. So, I still haven't really answered the question, why doesn't that decrease the price of lumber? Well, lumber is a cyclical industry. It has its ups and its downs. And a lot of those ups and downs are tied to construction and the housing market. And so in 2007, 2008, you had the housing crisis. And building just dropped off a cliff, and you can see that here on this graph. So lumber prices fell off a cliff, and they haven't really recovered until now. And so part of the problem is that no one is going to go out and invest in a big sawmill when lumber prices are so low. There's not enough money to be made. And a lot of the new sawmills cost millions of dollars and take months to set up. And so they're not going to be out building sawmills when there's not a demand for lumber. They would just lose all their money. And so what's happening now today is that there aren't enough sawmills. While you may have tons and tons of raw timber, there's not enough sawmills to process that raw timber to get us the lumber that we really need to supply everyone out there who's using it, mostly, again, home building. Also, today's lumber mills are far more efficient than lumber mills were in the past, which means that they actually use less raw timber to get the same amount of boards as what they did before. So I know that was a lot, but the point of all that is to say that timberland owners, the people who own the raw timber, the land that the raw timber, the raw trees are on, timberland owners are not making any money. In fact, they're making less money than they ever have made before. So if it's not timberland owners, it's not retailers, it's not loggers or truck drivers or sawmill workers, who is getting rich from high lumber prices? Well, that really only leaves us one option, and that is the big sawmills and the big lumber producing companies. So by some estimates, there's around 3,000 sawmills or lumber mill companies in the United States. Most of those are very small operators that specialize in certain types of wood, and they're not the ones who are milling all the lumber that's used to build homes. The companies that are really milling all the lumber for homes consist of large corporations. And the 5 biggest in the United States are these: Weyerhaeuser, Georgia Pacific, West Fraser, Sierra Pacific, and Interfor. So Georgia Pacific and Sierra Pacific are both privately held companies, either by families or by large investors. So they don't publish publicly available financial information. But the 3 other companies are public, which means that they publish financial statements. So I had to look first at Weyerhaeuser's financial statements. And what I found was that their sales from 2019 to 2020 increased by about 15%. Another interesting thing was, even though their sales were up by about 15%, their costs were not up significantly at all, less than 1%. So they had much more in sales, but their costs stayed about flat. The most interesting thing, however, was that their net income was up from 2019, when they lost about $76 million, to 2020, where they had a gain of $797 million. So that is an increase of $750 million that they made in 2020. And again, that was with a good portion of the year where they had some loss. So who knows what their income is going to be in 2021 with lumber prices as high as they are. And that really reflects into their stock price. Looking here at a graph of their stock price is up from about $15 a share last year to almost $37 a share today. And that's an increase of about 147%. But that's actually a pretty small stock price increase compared to a couple of the other companies. West Fraser, their stock price in the same time has risen 279%, and Interfor, their stock price has risen by 459%, from nearly $4 a share a year ago to $22 a share today. So, who's getting rich off of high lumber prices? It's not the loggers, it's not the truck drivers, it's not the workers, it's not even the retailers. It's definitely not timberland owners. The people that are getting rich off of high lumber prices are the large sawmill and lumber mill companies. They're the ones that are making all the money. So if you want to direct your anger, don't direct it at Home Depot, or don't direct it at timberland owners, don't direct it at anyone else, direct it at those companies. Or hey, buy stock. So when is that going to change? When are lumber prices going to come back to normal? I'm working on a video right now that's an update to my video from last November, talking about what's really driving lumber prices today and when we can see that change. So be sure to subscribe to my channel so you can watch that video once I come out with it. Also, if you like this video, be sure to hit that like button. Again, subscribe to my channel. And also let me know your thoughts. Do you work in the lumber industry? Are you seeing some of the things that I'm talking about? Or do you have an experience that's different? Do you have something to share? Please add a comment below and let me know. And thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.